Chapter 6. Stranded. 3 days elapsed, during which Dan, Brad, and the other cubs spent much time at the Y and at the river practicing for the final swimming meet of the year with Den 1. Annoyed by the manner in which they had been treated by Paperbag Eddie and his friend Frisk, the two cubs interested themselves in making a few inquiries along the waterfront. They learned that a sailor by the name of Fagin frequently was seen with Eddie, although known to have no employment. He was reported to always have enough money in his pocket. "I'm as sure as anything Fagin was in the motorboat that struck us," Dan repeated to Brad one afternoon when the two boys were at the river preparing for a swim. "I suspect that was why he acted so sore in the cafe. He was afraid we'd accuse him." Since their meeting with Paperbag Eddie and the sailor, the two cubs had not seen either of them again, nor had they glimpsed Mr. Manham's boat or any that resembled it. On this particular afternoon, Mr. Holloway had promised to take Brad, Dan, and Midge for a sail. 4 o'clock, the hour appointed for their meeting at the Yacht Club dock, came and went. Finally, Mr. Holloway telephoned from his office to say that he had been held up and would be unable to make the excursion. "There's no reason why you boys can't take the boat by yourself," he urged. "You're both experienced at handling the tiller and good swimmers. Go ahead. Only don't go too far from the yacht club. A storm could kick up before dusk." Fortifying themselves with bottles of pop, Dan and Brad hoisted sail and cast off. With Brad at the tiller, they sailed down the canal, past Fish Island, and on toward Skeleton Island. They had been anxious to explore this island for some time. Dan lounged in the bottom of the boat, lazily sipping his drink. "Let's sail all the way around Skeleton Island," he proposed. "Okay?" "Sure, if we have time," Brad agreed, glancing at the darkening skies. "Those clouds are rolling up fast. We might have rain in a couple of hours." "We'll make it back before then," Dan replied, stretching luxuriously out. "The breeze is just right now." In a long tack, they crossed to the far shore of the river and came about, pointing toward Skeleton Island. As Dan dropped an empty pop bottle overboard, he noticed a mahogany boat almost directly opposite the island. The craft had pulled up along shore, its motor idling. The boys were unable to see the occupants or to obtain a clear view of the boat itself, for it lay half hidden in a clump of bushes. "That boat looks like Mr. Mannheim's," he remarked, calling Brad's attention to it. "Wonder what it's doing over there. No one appears to be fishing." Holding the sailboat to its course, the two cubs kept watch of the idle motorboat. Though they were too far away to be certain the craft was Mr. Mannheim's, they thought it bore a remarkable resemblance to the craft operated by Wilson Jabowski. Presently, as the boys watched, they saw someone aboard the motorboat lower and raise a red flag 3 times in succession. "What's the idea of that?" Dan demanded. "All attention? They're signaling." "To someone on Skeleton Island," Brad added quickly. Dan turned his gaze towards the island beach. A man stood there, apparently focusing his attention upon the motorboat. In answer to the signal, he raised and lowered his arms 3 times. "What goes?" Brad muttered. For a while the cubs witnessed nothing more of interest. A man on the beach vanished from their range of vision, while the motorboat remained in a clump of bushes. "Guess there's nothing more to see," Dan remarked in disappointment. "Yes, there is," Brad corrected, bringing the sailboat closer into the wind. "Listen." The two boys distinctly could hear the put-put-put of a gasoline engine. For a minute, they could not localize the sound. Then, from the far shoulder of the island, they saw a flat gasoline-propelled raft scooting across the river. "That looks like Jabowski," Dan observed, "and he's heading straight towards the motorboat. Can we get closer, Brad?" "Unless the breeze shifts, it'll take us 2 or 3 tacks to come even up with the island. And by that time there may be nothing to see, Dan grumbled. I sure wish we had a pair of binoculars. Dividing their attention between pressing for more speed out of their own craft and watching the raft, the boys begrudged the time it took to make a long tack. The raft, they noted, moved directly to the waiting motorboat. What transpired at the meeting place they were unable to see. So intent were the cubs on watching the boat and the raft that they paid scant heed to the low cumulus clouds which had gathered close to the horizon. Black underneath and hard-edged, they were moving up fast from the leeward side. The cubs, however, were elated because a stiffening breeze rapidly bore them toward Skeleton Island. Now they could discern 2 men aboard the motorboat. Though they could not see the face of the man on the raft, they were convinced he was Jabowski. What do you figure they're doing, Dan speculated, and who are those men that have Mr. Mayhem's speedboat? Maybe it isn't his, Brad replied. I'd say it's the same length and make, though. Apparently observing the approach of the sailboat, the raft began to pull away from the motorcraft. At that same moment, a dead calm fell upon the river. Startled, Brad raised his eyes to the sail, which had been drawing well. Now it slumped into listless, discouraged folds. Just our luck, Dan muttered in disgust. The breeze pays out. It's worse than that, Brad said, thoroughly alarmed. We're in the calm that precedes a bad thunderstorm. Both the sky and the water had taken a dark cast. Although not a breath of air stirred, heavy waves pounded against the drifting boat. Gosh, we're a long way from shore, too, Dan said in dismay. Skeleton Island is the closest point of land. Think we can make it before the storm breaks? Not a chance, Brad muttered. She's coming now. Across the water, they could see a misty sheet of water descending. There will be a wind in a minute. Plenty of it, Dan. Help me get the sail down before it strikes us. Working with all speed, the boys lowered the sail from the mast. Before they could furl it, the wind struck, throwing the boat far over on its side. Dan's cub cap was lifted from his head and carried far down the river. For a moment it floated on the surface and then slowly sank out of sight. Dan scrambled to fasten down all other loose objects. Rain now was coming down in a torrent. Unable to see many feet ahead of them, the boys lost sight of the raft and the motorboat. For a time they could hear the chug-chug of the raft's engine, and then all sound except the howl of the wind died away. This is awful, Dan exclaimed, as a vivid streak of lightning cut across the dark sky. Let's strike for Skeleton Island. We can find shelter there at least. He reached for a paddle. Already the strong wind was propelling the boat in the general direction of the island. At the tiller, Brad guided the craft more by instinct than sight. Wind and rain had blotted out all view of the shore. Finally, the shadowy island loomed up. Worn out from the hard paddling, Dan put on the last burst of energy which drove the boat onto the sandy beach. Leaping out, he and Brad pulled the craft high on the sand beyond the reach of the waves. Then they raced for shelter of the heavy wooded section some distance back from the beach. Jabberwocky lives in the caretaker's quarter at the other end of the island, Brad remarked, huddling against the trunk of a sheltering oak. We might go there. I'd rather wait here, Brad. This storm couldn't last long. Then we can hoist canvas and sail back to the clubhouse. Already the rain had slackened. The cubs waited 20 minutes under the trees. By that time, the downpour had dwindled to a drizzle. Then they made their way back through the dripping bushes to the beach. Hey, where's the boat? Dan demanded, stopping short. A stretch of beach where the craft had been left less than 30 minutes before was now deserted. But the boat can't be gone, Brad exclaimed, refusing to believe his eyes. We pulled it well up on the sand before we took shelter. The waves weren't high enough to have washed it away. Well, it's gone all right. And there it is, Brad. Dan pointed 200 yards from shore where the empty sailboat drifted aimlessly. Slowly, the craft was being carried downstream by the current. The cubs stared at it in dismay. Without the sailboat, they were stranded on Skeleton Island. Do, 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 do.